these are all huge traumatic parts of our history that have been completely omitted. And to me, the opposite of love isn't hate, it's apathy. Silence erases our humanity.
Welcome to At Liberty, a weekly show where we're going to go deep on the civil rights and civil liberties questions of our time. I'm Molly Kaplan, Multimedia Director at the ACLU, and your host. This week, I'm talking with humanitarian Amanda Nguyen about mobilizing a nationwide response to the surging attacks on Asian Americans. Amanda, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
I want to start with this viral video that you posted on February 5th. What led you to make that video?
Honestly, it was because when I read it and I saw these videos of people being horrifically attacked in my community, I didn't see the mainstream media covering it, and I didn't see anyone else talking about it. And so I thought to myself, if no one's going to talk about it, I'm going to use my voice and I'm going to use my platform and ask people to help me get the word out. And overnight, millions of people responded to it. So 3 million people viewed it overnight, and then in the following days, 11.4 posts went up, million posts went up on TikTok in response to it. The next business day, the White House press corps asked the president if he had seen the video.
Were you surprised by the reaction, or were you like, no, this makes total sense because nobody else is talking about this?
I honestly was really surprised because this wasn't the first time that I had talked about this issue before or about race in general. And every time that I had posted about race, I had lost followers. So when I turned on my camera that day to record that video, I honestly thought that I was going to lose more followers. And I told myself, you know what, it doesn't matter. I am going to do this because it's the right thing to do and because people are literally dying to be heard right now.
You know, I want to talk to the larger race dynamics of these attacks, but I actually first wanted to ask why these attacks may be personal to you. You identify as Asian American and have talked about your family's immigration story, and I was wondering if you might share some of that story and tell us a little bit about how it has affected your experience of these attacks and your response to them.
Yeah, of course. I'm so glad you asked that question because so many of these interviews I've been doing have just been focused on the, terrible parts of it. You know, I'm so proud to be a hyphenated American, and in my experience, it's been Asian American, Vietnamese American, and my parents are boat refugees from Vietnam. They went into death to seek life and to reach these shores where they thought that they would find freedom. And freedom for us has not only been, the freedom to exist without persecution, it also is the rest of the things that is afforded to us in that Constitution, including the right to petition the government. And for me, at least, it's not only a privilege, but a responsibility to keep pushing our country to be a more perfect union. For me, growing up as an Asian American, I grew up in Corona, California, where there aren't actually that many Asian Americans. I remember being one of the very few in my elementary school, middle school, and even still in high school. And it comes with the immigrant experience when you are really a minority and you look around and no one looks like you, eats the same food that you do. And then, you grow up and then you see that all the things that you were made fun of for all of a sudden become really trendy when other communities appropriate it. So that's part of the immigrant, an unfortunate part of the Asian American experience. Of course, there's this perpetual foreigner stereotype, right? I think every single Asian American has been asked the question, where are you from? No, really, where are you from? And while that is and could sound like an innocent question, at the heart of it, at the root of it, is this idea that you don't belong. And when you keep insinuating, perpetuating this idea of othering a whole group of people, what you have are consequences that have resulted in lives being lost.
I guess I'm curious, did you experience or did your family experience racism directly in the community, or was it this pervasive, or in addition, this pervasive feeling around belonging and around, is it an anxiety about not being the majority in the majority rule?
I mean, it certainly is anxiety about being killed on the street. These attacks that have been to people doing everyday things like walking on the street or going grocery shopping. I think one of the things that really stuck with me in a scarring way was March of 2020. A man stabbed a family. In that stabbing, he stabbed a 2-year-old and a 6-year-old because he thought that they were Chinese, they were Burmese. And he, on the record, said that he thought they were spreading COVID. So, there's been a thread of people saying, well, how do you know if these are really hate crimes? Not only are these crimes caught on camera, they're also being fully admitted to by the perpetrators.
And it's worth mentioning that having had a president who was really leaning into these stereotypes and harmful prejudices definitely didn't help in any of this.
Oh, yeah, he stoked it. It's undoubtable that leadership matters. And he has millions of people who believe what he says and listens to him. And when leaders say things like China virus or Kung flu, it has consequences.
Understanding the assaults it also feels like we need to understand the larger history of racism against Asians and Asian Americans in the US. And, you've been sharing resources on television and social media about the history of anti-Asian racism in the US. Are there certain chapters in particular in this history that you feel are just not getting taught or are completely undertaught for most people in this country?
Yes, nearly everything. There was a study in 2009 that showed that in some federal agencies, they don't even include Asian Americans as part of their definition of racial minorities. We are completely omitted. Right? 2010 census showed that Asian Americans are the largest growing body of ethnic minorities, and yet a Reuters poll showed that we aren't reached out to during elections. We're consistently left off of polling. Political parties do not care about our communities. They do not actually talk to us. And oftentimes when I'm in progressive spaces that espouse missions of diversity, I look around and I'm the only Asian American. We're literally erased. That includes not only, current times and examples I've listed, but our history has been erased. People don't know that Japanese American citizens were rounded up like animals in these internment camps. People don't know that one of the largest lynchings in U.S. history, the Chinese massacre, was against Asian Americans. People don't know that the KKK targeted Vietnamese Americans when they came over here in New Orleans and burned their boats. These are all huge traumatic parts of our history that have been completely omitted. And to me, the opposite of love isn't hate, it's apathy. Silence erases our humanity.
Where do you think this come from, this omission? And why isn't Asian American racism better understood or accounted for?
Yeah, so in order to be anti-racist, you have to include the Asian American experience. And I think one of the key tools of repression that have erased Asian Americans is the model minority myth. This idea that AAPIs can be really successful because they are white adjacent, or because they are really hardworking, they don't speak up, we don't complain when there's an issue. And for those who subscribe by this model minority myth, it's the idea that if you do all of these things, that one day you will be handed the keys to the kingdom. And that's just not true. The data has shown that there is a bamboo ceiling in corporate America. It's like the glass ceiling. And the phrase refers to the idea that even if people work really hard, Asian Americans will consistently be barred from C-suite jobs and decision-making positions.
I'm wondering how you personally navigate that space of, basically erasure, because it's the implication is that your pain doesn't matter because the pain is out there. The history is telling a story. Our newspapers are now, in part because you help them, reporting on these assaults. But for some reason, it doesn't always seem to penetrate in the same way. So how do you navigate that personally?
By speaking up. That's what that video was. It's by calling out systems, structures that have excluded people like me for centuries. That's why that video was calling out media, calling out journalists to be responsible in their reporting. And it's so important that people understand how powerful their voices can be, and the most powerful tool we have is our voice. So that's why I'm using mine to speak up about these issues.
You talked about there I am again, the model minority myth, and I'm wondering, are there other frameworks that are more helpful? Like, how can we do this better so that we're not caught in this binary of black and white, and then Asian Americans everything's all good, it's fine, we don't need to address. We don't even, the polling, I think, is particularly remarkable that in terms of representation, that voice doesn't matter.
Exactly. Literally omitted. And it's everything that's omitted, from our grief to our contributions to our excellence. And I saw this sign recently at a march, and it said, "If you like our food, care about our people." And I think it just speaks to how in the model minority framework, it's very, what's that word? When you're like a leech. It's very parasitic, that's the word, where we only exist to benefit you, but our pain, all of our complexities, the fact that we're not a monolith, all that doesn't matter. So, when you're talking about different frameworks, it's so, so important to be intersectional as we move forward into a more equitable world. For me, that means making sure that as we talk about issues, we include everyone, right? As including, me calling out to my Asian brothers and sisters and making sure that when we do our anti-Asian, hate crimes work, that we also make sure we call out anti-Black sentiment within the community. It's so important that we understand justice isn't zero-sum and that we are stronger together.
I want to talk a little bit more about that coalition building. Can you give some examples of where, in this particular effort that has taken place and sort of flourished? And also curious, what is the response to the idea of this? When you've done a lot of appearances on television and social media, when you talk about the model minority myth or about the fact that this racism is happening and it needs attention, what has been the feedback on that? What kind of response do you get? Are people surprised?
Yeah, I think people are just getting exposed to this for the first time. There's so many people just didn't know that our community was being lit on fire, having acid thrown on them, having babies being stabbed, having their faces slashed across their face, right? Like, these are horrific things that we live day to day, but people just didn't know about it. And people are getting exposed for the first time to these internment camps, learning about how we built the railroads that connect this country, right? So I think at the root of it is ignorance. And if you are able to tell our stories, if we're able to use empathy, that is the solution, right? To humanize us and have points of entry. We're in a moment right now, a zeitgeist moment, where it's an inflection point and we get to choose as a country where we go from here, more inclusive or letting this fizzle out. And it's at this moment that people should realize their choices, their individual choices really do matter. Even if it's a like or a share or donating dollars, donating dollars to Rise, all of it really, really matters.
And can you say more about the coalition building? Like, what does that actually look like on the ground?
Yeah, I honestly, the reason why this broke outside of the bubble is because people like Questlove, Wanda Sykes, Amy Schumer, Alana Glazer reposted it. And we wouldn't be here if it was not for other communities standing in solidarity. So half of it is a space that has been created because people feel like for the first time their grief is being seen and won't be erased, that their grief is validated. I can't tell you, there's literally thousands upon thousands of messages that I've been getting of people saying, hey, my father was murdered. Hey, my grandma was attacked. Hey, like I got this racial note in my business telling me to get out of Texas, right? Like there are all of these messages that are flooding in because people feel like for the first time they can speak their truth, and that includes their pain. And the other part of it is that there are other communities who are saying, yeah, I see you and I stand with you.
It sort of reminds me that this isn't your first time at coalition building. I heard you describe how when you went to testify before Congress for the first time, you were invited by both sides of the aisle. And when you went to sign in, the person didn't believe that you were supposed to be there.
Yes.
And it was a really disheartening way to start that experience. But you actually, yes. You went back for your second of 3 times testifying, and you went with Terry Crews, who's an activist and actor, I think former football player, and he was standing with you and supporting you. But actually, if I'm remembering correctly, after that first time, you called other leaders in the space, like Alicia Garza, and were like, what do I do? And I'm wondering if you can talk about how what you are bringing to the space right now around coalition building, around giving a platform in a space, is really bringing to bear some of these really painful experiences you've had and what you learned personally in the process.
Yeah, intersectionality is the heart of what at least Rise is doing at this moment. It's about visibility, and that visibility has to be in conjunction with other communities standing in solidarity, and also in creating these spaces of empathy. It's so difficult to talk about painful subjects, right? And for people to start being vulnerable, I think one of the key things is for people to feel safe enough to do so. There are folks who take that risk in the beginning to speak up, and when people see that, oh, okay, hey, that person is doing that, maybe I can do that too, and that human to human aspect of organizing will always be part of organizing, even if it's moved digitally, in this pandemic world, even if social media has been an enormous tool of activism and organizing.
It also sounds, I don't know what does that. The reverb came back. It also sounds like part of this work is recognizing that when you experience fear, even in your surroundings, even if it's not happening directly to you, that there's a silencing effect. And part of it, what it seems you're doing, is building up these safer spaces so that it can get attention, so that it can have a feeling of community, because this is about dividing community. I wanted to talk more about Rise. and the justice labs that you've developed, because so much of what you're doing right now feels very related to that work. I mean, particularly in coalition building.
Yeah.
Can you talk about what Rise Justice Labs is and how you've brought this coalition building model? And honestly, the coalition building model feels like, let's be human, let's do what humans do well, which is community building and loving each other and supporting one another. Like, this is the best version of humanity. Let's develop that. So yeah, can you tell us a little bit about Rise Justice Labs and how that coalition building model was brought there?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I actually wouldn't be here right now, and quite honestly, the movement would not have had as many educational resources we've been able to pump out without my team at Rise. So I'm so grateful to them for working overtime as we're trying to meet this moment. Rise Justice Labs, Rise for short, is about teaching people their access point to democracy. So it's helping people pen their own civil rights into existence. And it started, from me almost 7 years ago now, when I needed civil rights, and I looked around and nobody was going to help me write them. So I decided to do it myself. And what was remarkable was not only that we were able to pass the Sexual Assault Survivor Bill of Rights unanimously, but that over 1 million people reached out to say, hey, you don't look like what it looks like to be in power, what a lawmaker looks like, and yet, you were able to do this. So can you help me with my own community problem? Can you teach me? And that's what Rise Justice Labs does. We teach people how to use their voice and fulfill that constitutional right of petitioning the government.
And part of what you did that is so remarkable is that you've gamified lawmaking, which, P.S., when I think about making a law, I think above my pay grade, like cannot do. And so how did you do that? What does that even look like?
Yeah, so games have a couple aspects to them that make it very addicting, but also make it very appealing. One is that there's a clear finish line, right? And this relates to burnout in activism. A lot of people leave activism because over time they don't see a return on investment of their energy, and there isn't this deadline where they can say, okay, I'm done, and now I reassess, whether or not I can give more, what I can give. People just give, and then they realize, oh, I can't do this anymore. Games also have different levels where you skills build. So you never you have mini bosses right before you get to the big boss. And it's really important. When people start out at Rise, most of them don't have a background in politics, and it doesn't matter. So what matters is that you're from that community you're trying to serve, and that you have a heart, and you also are willing to practice radical empathy. We can get to that in a second, but the point of hopeonomics is the theory that I created to gamify the process of lawmaking, is to make sure that, as you are going through this process, you feel like there is momentum, and that the energy that you're putting into something shows up as results. So what does that mean? We are really metrics and data driven. So for instance, every Sunday we have a report out where all of our campaign leads, so state directors, international directors for their international campaigns, read out the stats of what they accomplished that week. And if a bill gets passed in Alabama, it impacts how organizers on the ground feel in Alaska, because people feel like they're part of a community, right? And that's also another part of games.
I think about Nintendo, which is the last time I played a game. I was, I don't know, 7.
The Nintendo 64?
I think it was version 1, maybe. But it's the gold coins. It was so satisfying to do something and get those gold coins. So this is the gold coin version of that.
Definitely.
To get that payoff.
It's that's exactly what it is. You hear that ding ding ding,
and it gives you energy. And then you're like, oh, I can keep going. I can handle more.
Yeah, definitely. Getting a law signed seems really scary, but reaching out to one senator or reaching out to one representative and briefing them is a lot more doable. So it's about having a plan and making it bite-sizable.
I also think that one thing that you've really identified is that the model that you started was around giving rights to sexual assault survivors, but that was scalable, and that so much of what applied to one group of people who were being just horribly mistreated by the political system could be expanded. Was there a moment when you realized, like, hey, what we're doing here, which by the way was tremendous, like that legislation was went through in a Congress that was not doing a lot of legislation, so that on its own is remarkable. But what was the moment you realized everything I'm doing here applies to these other issue areas? And also, what are some of the other issue areas that Rise is now working on?
Yeah. Well, if you work on civil rights issues, most likely you're going to be going through judiciary. And what I realized is that when I was doing cross-coalition building, that I could learn so much from the marriage equality movement, from other movements at that time. This is before Black Lives Matter, but still now from the Black Lives Matter movement. And that there's this tendency in the field of, nonprofits, but also of activism, to silo these issues. And there's so much turf. I mean, every single industry has turf, but it's so unfortunate when you have turf within these problems which are so critical, so urgent, and demands the attention and need for people to work together. And so one of the key things about Rise Justice Labs is making sure that people from all different types of movements are able to community build together. And that has happened with our cohorts, and I'm so proud of them. So the first group that we incubated were the Parkland survivors and community. They came from, a lot of them from March Our Lives, and after they organized the march, they had come and said, hey, we have some ideas about how to pass legislation. We've seen you do it. Can you help us? And honestly, before they came, I had already been thinking, okay, we have these massive resources about how to navigate different state houses and Hopenomics, and it's absolutely applicable to other issues. But our goal is to get all 50 states done. Afterwards, we'd create this accelerator. But they came, and I said, you know what? Yeah, absolutely, we'll help you. And they were our pilot program, and they ended up passing extreme risk protection order in Colorado, which was the law that they had focused on during their time at Rise. And one of them, Cameron Marsh, ended up staying on to develop out the accelerator for other civil rights issues. We have our first cohort right now, actually, and it's the Tennessee Alliance for Black Lawyers. They're working on voting rights. And we have the Every Voice Coalition. They're working on campus sexual assault. And then the last one is called Breaking Code Silence. They are working on children's rights in the troubled teen industry. Paris Hilton is a part of the group. And, all of these incredible activists and organizers have been such a joy to work with. It's a 12-week program at Rise Justice Labs, and every single week it's a different topic, like drafting your bill, to developing your communications plan, to developing your fundraising development program, and the biggest joy has been to see not only them grow through the process, but also to see them work together, cross-pollination between issues.
One thing that really strikes me as different about the Rise model, having been in a nonprofit space for a while now, is that there is very little ego in this model, which brings me back to something that you said earlier about radical empathy.
Yeah.
This is not about like the Rise branding and getting the Rise name out there. This is really about helping other people in the space to do the same work. Mm-hmm. And to me, it also is related, and I'm curious what you think about this, to the coalition building we were talking about, because if one group that is experiencing a type of violence or discrimination is not getting the attention they need, that's bad for everybody. And Rise seems to understand that it's all connected. I'm just wondering if you could respond to that. And also, you said that you were going to talk more about that radical empathy. And do you see a connection with the radical empathy? And what does that even mean to you? Like, what is radical empathy?
Yes. I'm so glad you brought up ego, because that's literally the bane of my existence. So, radical empathy is this idea that we have to climb over very uncomfortable walls and sit in spaces and engage with people who might not see the humanity in us, and we're trying to see the humanity in them. And it is a really, really tall order. It is super difficult. What do I mean by this? When we worked on our first law, I had to talk to many politicians who had very, let's call them, interesting ideas about rape. And
Can we also name that a lot of the people you were talking to, I think I've heard you say, were pretty much all white men, or largely,
yeah.
who may not have had similar experiences or shared experience.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's really hard to legislate policies when you are disconnected from the reality on the ground, or you haven't experienced it yourself. That's not a necessary component to legislating, but it is really important that you have community members at the drafting table who have experienced the thing that you're going to govern them on. And so it was very difficult to get people to understand. And what is the most difficult thing is to also understand where they're coming from. And that's not something that we expect anyone who has just been through a trauma to be able to do, right? So it does take an immense amount of grounding work, of healing, to engage healthily in this work where you're dealing directly with your own civil right, your own human rights on the line. And
what were the responses that you got when you were first sitting down and talking about? And also, can you just name what, like, for example, one of the laws that you were trying to tackle around rape kits or anything? Because I think just naming one brings to light, you know, what we're talking about here is pretty extreme in the direction of really bad ideas.
Yeah, totally. So one of the rights is to be notified of your rights. It's so basic. It's like a Miranda rights, but for survivors. And that's really critical because, you know, DNA evidence from your body, your crime scene is the body in a rape. So your body being a biological piece of evidence disintegrates on a timeline. You have to get the rape kit in at least 72 hours. And so when a person goes to the police or they, you know, go to the hospital, they should be informed immediately, like what the situation is, where they can get resources, what their rights are. Some of the pushback we got was, oh, well, this is unfair to the accused if the survivor knows what her rights are. No, it is not. In fact, so what we said to that was, you know, we worked with the Innocent Project, you know, and said that if you're able to preserve the kit, it can exonerate the accused, right? So, you know, again, that's like radical empathy, right? Like, okay, well, let's get to what the common sector here is, and like the overlap is that we both want the truth and we both want justice, right? And so how do we see it from your side, right? And you know, we ended up being able to. The Innocence Project's former executive director was a huge proponent of our initial law in Massachusetts, and she was the one who really helped get it through. Another example is the right to be able to, if available, talk to a police officer of the gender of your choosing. And one of the feedback we got was, that means that we have to hire female police officers everywhere in this state, and that's going to cost billions of dollars. And we're like, okay, so first of all, it's like if you have that option, but second of all, it's a bigger problem that you don't have female police officers or anyone like that identifies as a woman at all in your organization. So
It's
that's
interesting though that it was framed as being your problem.
yeah, like
not their problem.
So if you don't have any women at all, it's something you should look into.
And when you're talking about the Parkland students, you know, in that case, they're being attacked by some of these legislators.
Oh, yeah.
Like, it's not just like
Yeah.
empathy when you address some of these issues where you may not see eye to eye. You are personally being attacked. So I imagine that in those cases, this training is hard.
It is brutal. It is very hard, which is why we like tell people up front, you know, it's this work is work and it's not a replacement for therapy. And so if you're engaging in this, you know, we highly recommend that, you know, you assess how you are, where you are in your own journey of healing. And also, like, what are you motivated by, right? If you're motivated by revenge, it's going to be really difficult because what happens when, like, a key part of something that you don't want needs to be compromised so that the rest of these rights can go through, right? What are you going to do then? And I think that, of course, we're all human, so emotions really get tied up into policymaking, especially because politics has become a blood sport when it really shouldn't be about that. It really should be about working together, debating these policies and coming together on what's best for America. And it's gotten really lost along the way. So we do practice radical empathy. That is a core part of how we've been able to pass 33 laws.
I'm curious also if I haven't yet had the chance to take part in Rise Justice Labs, but I'm a listener and I want to help in my own way. I want to take part my own way. What are the sort of key things that I can take away from this? Like from your really difficult life experiences and what you came through with them, what can I learn? How can I do this better?
Well, just know that you already have it in you, you know? So the people who have the solutions to the world's most pressing problems are the people who live that problem every day. And there is a huge gap between those people and the people who hold the pen to write these laws. Rise Justice Labs is about bridging that gap. And, you know, I want folks to just know that you might feel like your access routes to democracy are limited. So most people ask, what do I do beyond voting or marching? And there is another option. That option is to write those laws yourself. You can pen your own civil rights into existence. You can organize and make your community better. And you can check out Rise Justice Labs if you want to. You know, we have applications that are going to be open, and people can apply with their own ideas. If you get accepted, we'll incubate you and your social movement, accelerate your civil rights campaign. And even if you don't get accepted, our lectures are public. So we really invite people to be able to access it because we aren't about hoarding information. You know, if people know me, they know that I love space and I want to go to space. So what I want to do is be able to pass on all this knowledge, create that blueprint so that I can get off the earth.
Wait, so I genuinely curious, what is the next chapter of space for Amanda? Like, are you going soon? Is there a 10-year plan, a 5-year plan? And why space? I know I've heard that space has long been a goal, but what is it about space?
Yeah, there's this effect that happens when astronauts go to space for the first time. It's called the overview effect. And it's an existential crisis, essentially. It's awe-inducing, terrifying, and it's a reset where people see everything that's ever lived or died on this pale blue dot. It's often referred to also as Spaceship Earth. And it makes these astronauts leave Earth as technical people, scientists, and return to Earth as humanitarians, profoundly moved to change the world around them. And that overview effect has always helped get me through tough times, you know, to have that perspective, that orbital perspective, and remember that we really are a blink of an eye in the universe. And while that can be both very scary, it could be both humbling and makes me feel so, so special. And so every day when I wake up, the burning questions that I have is, what is my place in the universe and what am I going to do about it? And I think both astrophysics and activism answers that question.
It's interesting because it seems like you already have that perspective.
Yeah, we can have it. The
you
beauty
just
of
see
consciousness.
it to have it reaffirmed. But also maybe you'll take it to the next level. Like maybe if you already have, I mean, radical empathy is part of that perspective, right? Like the whole point of radical empathy and love rather than apathy is about knowing that our places on this earth are precious, and we're one tiny speck of not even dust in the whole universe. So why are we fighting each other? So yeah, maybe that's the starting point, but you'll keep it going when you get to space.
Yeah, definitely.
But you're already doing the astronauts' work.
Yeah. Well, I just also want to tell people that we are multitudes. Rise's current campaign now on anti-Asian hate crimes and making us more visible is a part of a thread of a larger tapestry of justice, right? All of these things that I've mentioned, justice, voting rights and sexual assault survivor rights and children's rights, we're all interconnected. And I think a lot of people may be scared to take their first step into activism, perhaps because they're afraid it might define them. And I want people to know that we are multitudes. You can love fashion, you can love space, you can be an activist, you can be it all. And that at the end of the day, it's about making you fulfill your own soul, to be happy. Because joy is the most radical form of rebellion.
Yeah. Speaking of fashion, by the way, Amanda, there is a photo of you on Instagram in this fetch white dress alongside Kamala Harris. And I just want to reinforce the point that you can be a humanitarian and also have great fashion sense.
Thanks.
It is, I'm getting married, or I am married, but I'm having a wedding someday when the pandemic ends. And I was like, oh, I wish that were my wedding dress. It's nice so great. Also, it sort of looks like something, and I hope this is a compliment, out of Star Trek. Like, everything is coming back to space for me.
Oh, yeah.
Even Rise now feels like, it's like a spaceship going into the universe, like rising above it all, so you can get that astronaut's perspective.
That's so funny.
So I really feel the space. Amanda, thank you so much. Thank you so much for the work that you're doing everywhere. And by the way, were you really excited about the landing in Mars?
Duh. It's definitely my self-care.
Did you watch it live or recapped after?
Oh my gosh, I had to do a recap. It was so sad. I had to watch it after. But honestly, it just fills my heart with joy because these people work for literally decades in order to have this moment. And I think that watching scientists see their mission fulfilled, either it be through a launch or a landing or whatever it is, that to me is one of the purest forms of love there is. A love of science, of mission, and of, quite honestly, posterity, because science is for all.
Yeah. On that, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. To get more of these conversations, subscribe to the channel and click the notification bell, or subscribe to At Liberty wherever you get your podcasts.